Welcome to What's Up with Catalight, a podcast designed to raise the many important voices that are helping to shape the future for people with autism and IDDs by challenging the status quo. Your host, Dr. Lindsey Sneed, dives into the thought-provoking topics happening in the industry and at Catalight, from advocacy to research to treatment options and more. Tune in to discover how Catalight's innovative treatment options are pressuring industry-wide change and shining a spotlight on care that's shaping the landscape for individuals with developmental disabilities. This is What's Up with Catalight.
I am so excited to be here today, to be here with Brian Middleton. Brian is the Bearded Behaviorist, and I have been following Brian for a couple of years now. On LinkedIn and his work and following his work at various conferences. Brian is a human, and he's a human who experiences the autistic and ADHD neurotype. He is passionate about learning, exploring, and understanding. He is a human who believes that community is critical to success, his included. He is a husband, a father, a friend, a teacher, a poet, a behavior scientist, and a curious and inquisitive person who is selfish enough to want a better world for everyone. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Well, why don't we dive right in? So at Catalight, one of our big areas of care for the intellectual and developmental disability community, the IDD community, is really focusing on well-being for the individual. Well-being regardless of whatever disability they may or may not have, but really focusing on how can, by what we're doing in this individual's life, improve, hopefully, their well-being. So with that in mind, I would really love to hear your perspective, Brian, on how we can move away from a one-size-fits-all approach when we're looking at providing care for autistic folks as well as autistic people and their families. Like, how do we move away from having always done it this way? Do we move forward positively?
Well, that's a big question, and the answer is not simple. I wish it was simple, but unfortunately, the reality is that the reason why supports are needed are multifaceted and complex.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that will boil things down in from one direction or another and make it out like, well, it's this or it's this, and it is multifaceted, just like thriving is multifaceted.
Sure.
Like happiness is a quotient that we need to look at and be aware of, but also contentment, also the ability to handle the chaos that life throws at us, just because it's the nature of living. Like all of those different things. The soundbite answer would be move away from pathologizing and towards not only awareness, acceptance, and inclusion, but belonging.
Ooh, I like that a lot. The belonging piece in particular. So I'm a psychologist, and I have been trained in behavior analysis as well. Just to shout out that Brian's ability to speak in behavior talk is unreal. And I really appreciate that about him. But anyway, so I'm a psychologist. So one thing I think about when I think about this one size fits all approach, and that it can't be all one size fits all, is the referral question. So I'm always thinking about the referral question. Why is this person coming into care? What is the individual wanting? And when I work with autistic youth and adults, it's never about their autism. It's never about changing anything about the autistic person as having an autistic identity. Usually it's about anxiety, depression, wanting to have successful social relationships in various forms. Like it could be a romantic relationship or having friendships, things like that. So I'm always wanting to challenge people to think about their referral question. And I think if we can think about the referral question and help guide the individual and or their family in that direction, that could be another way to support, like, not just one size fits all, which I think goes into the belonging piece too, of you're allowed to be both autistic and have anxiety. You're allowed to be both autistic and have depression. And just because you're autistic doesn't mean that's what we're going to focus on.
Well, and something to just kind of throw in there, first, a shout out to the families, is that there's unfortunately some diagonal ableism that's very common. Ableism meaning judgment for an individual or isolation or discrimination against an individual because they're not able to do something. So there's some diagonal ableism towards parents, where parents are expected to be able to navigate some very complex situations and are condemned and judged for not navigating those situations. And so I want to make sure that we're giving that shout out, that everything that I cover and I do, if you hear just sound bites, it might sound like I'm expecting the parents to pull the rabbit out of the hat, and there's no props and no sleight of hand. It's like some people would think from what I'm saying, if it's a snippet, that's what I'm expecting. And what other people in the disability community who are aligned with my perspective, or I'm aligned with their perspective, really, it doesn't matter either way, expect that. But the reality is that this goes back to that multifaceted issue, that caregiver support is critical.
Yeah.
And that to expect parents to know all the things and be able to pull that proverbial rabbit out of the hat every single day is nigh on impossible. And we need to be able to provide that support for caregivers as well as for people who experience disability, because it's a reality.
Yeah.
And that's actually a reality of that piece of belonging too, because the caregivers belong as well. A lot of times I see people talking over each other, and I see people moving goalposts, and I'm seeing that happen right now again. And I'm very concerned about it. But at the same time, I think this is an opportunity to have that hard conversation. The goalpost move that's happening is the profound autism goalpost.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like we're not gonna call it severe autism anymore. We're gonna call it profound autism. Or we're gonna move that goalpost, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to try to say, well, all this feedback from the community doesn't count. And that's a concern for me. And it's a concern for me because that, again, go back to goalpost moving. That's a logical fallacy. You move the goalpost to try to win the argument. But at the same time, the reason why the goalpost move is happening is because the autism community, the disability rights community, is kind of sort of edging parents out. Now, it's a two-way street. Yeah. It's a two-way street because parents are also coming into disabled spaces and then ragging on people and name calling and those sorts of things. But at the same time, it's like, whatever the term we use is, can we have the compassion and understanding for the person who's the primary caregiver and compassion and understanding for the person who's experiencing the disability?
Yeah. I really appreciate that perspective a lot. And something I tell particularly my students right now is whenever there's an extreme perspective, there's usually a nice middle where we can find some middle ground. And I think that's a piece of what you're speaking about right now is we have this parent group and these parents who we work with. I work with parents every day, and the importance of supporting parents in understanding their child and supporting their child, while at the same time acknowledging the humanity of their child, and especially as they're getting older, their autonomy and their independence and what's important to them. And just because somebody has a disability or autism, something I say a lot is that doesn't mean that they aren't going through the same normal life stages that like everyone else goes through, and acknowledging that we can support families and the individual, for example, when they're starting to go through puberty. Which actually brings me to another question that you spoke to, but maybe you can give some more specific examples, is what role do families play in measuring success when we're looking at treatment, support, interventions that are focused on the autistic individual?
In some ways, they play all the roles, and in some ways, they play a backseat role. And it depends on where the individual's at and the process of development and of exploration and that sort of thing. So I'll give an example. So my daughter, as of the time of this recording, is 15 months old. Okay, she's very cute. She's very sweet. She's exploring, she's discovering, and she's doing the thing that all toddlers do, which is put themselves in very dangerous situations very quickly.
Yes.
The number of times that I've been like, no. It's unreal. But at the same time, like we try to do a very good job of not being helicopter parents.
Sure.
Well, we like to try to make sure that she's able to do difficult things carefully.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that children need to be able to learn through experience. And as a parent, my job also is to make sure that she's not hurt. Or rather not hurt. Like if she trips and falls and bumps her knee or that sort of thing, that's not a big deal. But I'll give a good example of something that I am doing and my wife is doing is we're exposing her to a lot of things and we're letting her try things out. And yesterday, for the third time in a month, she helped me bake.
I love that.
And the stage where we're at right now is I put the cup in front of her, I point to it, and I say, put in. And sometimes she'll put her fingers in the recipe and like the ingredients, and she'll play with it. And we let that happen. We don't get in the way of it, right?
Sure.
It's but at the same time, like, and she's also pretty good at cracking eggs now with a little bit of help.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So it's again, it's using principles of behavior to teach skills, but at the same time, it's making sure that we're keeping her safe. So we're having her wash her hands. We're not letting her put raw eggs in her mouth, that sort of thing. And so yesterday she helped me make oatmeal spice cookies, is what I like to call them.
Yum.
And they're all so good. But for the first time, so the previous two times, I kept the stand mixer out of her space. Like she couldn't stretch and touch it. This time I put it right in front of her and she was up on her little stool and I was just ready. My hands were ready to block and redirect. And I would turn the stand mixer on as she would reach forward to touch as it was moving. And I would put my hand up to block and say, safe hands. We got to be careful. That's going to hurt. Right. And I redirect her to do other things. So I didn't just block her. I also gave her other things to do while she's watching it mix, because that's the common mistake is we have a very world narrowing approach of, oh, they did something dangerous. We're going to take it away. And it's like, well, they're probably the reason they're doing the dangerous thing is because they don't have an alternative.
Yes.
Right. Not always the case. Not always the case.
Yeah.
but like, and so, like I blocked and I redirected. Now, the reason why I'm exposing her to that and why I did that with intent is I want her to be aware of the dangers and learn how to discriminate, to use behavior analytic terms, or to be aware of, right, the potential danger of that and be safe around these things. Now, do I expect her to have this mastered anytime soon? No, because she's 15 months, right? But it's exposing early. So where I'm at right now as the parent, the caregiver, the person who's responsible for this very vulnerable little human is at where I am 100% on.
Yeah.
When I'm with her, and my wife is 100%. All our caregivers that support her are on, and we're observing and watching. But we're also making sure that she's able to do these dangerous and potentially risky things safely, and we show her how to interact with it. Now, as she gets further along in her understanding, her development, her growth. My job is to gradually ease myself back so that she has. Now, are we able to do that with every single person? No, of course not. Like there's some people who, because of just the phenotype that they have, the way that their biology expresses, they're going to need support their entire life. But that doesn't mean that we have to baby them or infantilize them. Quite the opposite. We need to make sure that these people are treated with the same dignity. So when I'm speaking to my daughter, yes, sometimes I do the giggly, like, oh, hi thing, right, while we're playing. But also when I'm talking to her, I'm saying, how are you? You having a good day?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. And she'll go, ah! And I'll be like, you're in your screaming phase, aren't you? Right. And we're just, it's a part of the process. And it's actually kind of funny because my niece, my wife's sister's daughter is here for the summer, and we're watching her and kind of being the parents for her. And we're seeing we're seeing that stage of progression where she's 12, 13 years old, right? She's building independence. We're still having accountability. We're still having structure. We're still having rules. We're still placing expectations in there. One of the conversations that we're having right now is balance and diet, because vegetables are the worst thing in the world, apparently. And a part of that conversation is, and props to my lovely wife, Heather, she's also a behavior analyst. She had this conversation with our niece of, niece says, can I have a Pop-Tart for a snack? And Heather doesn't say no. She says, how can you make that balanced?
I like that a lot.
And so it's not a restriction. It's a, how do we open up possibilities? How do we help to see what options are available? And that's often the piece that is missing when we're talking about making sure it's not one size fits all. Is the piece of, well, okay, so we've got these deficits, big air quotes there, like these things that the person doesn't know, but what do they know? What can they know? How can we, instead of restricting, how can we expand? How can I ask questions and engage? And it can be really hard, especially when we're talking about costly behaviors. I don't like to call them problem behaviors.
Okay.
I call them costly behaviors because they have a cost. They're not a problem for the person, because the person, everything that behavior analysis does from the perspective of the function of the behavior, from the individual's experience.
Yes.
So like reinforcement, it's not, I think it's reinforcing. It's, what does the behavior do? Punishment, it's not, I think it's punishing. It's, what does the behavior do? Well, that's why I describe it as costly behavior, because whilst it certainly is functioning and doing something for that person, it has a cost. It has a cost for that person. It has a cost for their community. It has a cost for their family. And so when it comes to that costly behavior, like sometimes we have to narrow before we expand, so that way we're safe. And at the same time, the question should always be coming back to, how can we expand? How can we build on possibilities? In behavior ease, we call those pivots and cusps.
Explain pivots and cusps a little bit for us.
So please, nobody kill me for getting these wrong. A pivot, if I remember correctly, is where we learn a skill and we're able to pivot it towards other areas of application. And a cusp is more of we learned this skill, and it's the cusp of a doorway, and it opens up options. So a good example of a pivot is the ability to turn something, like that fine gross motor combo thing of grabbing an object and turning it. It would be a key or a doorknob, right? So that would be a pivot, where we're able to pivot it across other different skill sets or applications. And the cusp would be learning how to drive. Right? So like being able to drive opens up your possibilities. You can potentially find employment. You can drive to a new location. You can go do adventurous things. You can connect with other people. It's a broadening of the world in opening up a massive, the term that behavior analysis uses is repertoire.
Yeah.
Which is just a big chunk of possible behaviors that the individual can go and learn and experience.
It's like walking too, then. Like
Yeah.
walking could be, or like some sort of mobility, because it gives you access to other things in your life.
Well, and like, and not just mobility, but also like the ability to read is a really great cusp. Because if you're able to read, or at least read enough to be able to access assistive technology, to be able to navigate the internet, then that is a cusp for internet communities. And for connecting with people, even if you're not able to move due to economics or mobility.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. It's so critical.
Yeah. When I'm thinking too, I love the story about your daughter, and I think that's really, really applicable, and it can be applied in so many different situations. The support, the teaching her when things are okay versus not okay, like that discrimination, and then helping her, what we call, generalizing the skills. So being able to apply it here and in across other stimuli, across other people, across other settings. It's really coming to mind for me as I'm thinking about parents. In my earlier career, I did a lot more work with younger children. And then in this portion of my career, it's like more youth and adults. And one thing about families playing an important role in the measuring success is that I think you hit the nail on the head, is in a storytelling way of acknowledging of that ability to increase the independence. So a conversation I often have with caregivers regarding particularly youth who are transitioning into puberty is reminding the caregivers that every single human goes through this process of puberty. And it is difficult whether you are neurodiverse or neurotypical, whether you have severe disabilities or not severe disabilities, you're going to experience this physiological change during puberty. And I often hear parents saying like, well, they're yelling and they're slamming the door so much now. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't say that's autism. Like that's not that's more like developmentally appropriate. So, and like trying to reframe it like that, like I actually love that your child is doing this, because we would actually expect other kids their age to also do this. It shows me that they're really trying to build their autonomy. How can we build on their autonomy even further in a way that is productive for you as a parent and for your child? So that was really coming to me as you were sharing your story.
So something to go along with that, because I think these stories are very helpful for bringing the ideas home. So I had a parent come to me a couple of years back, and they were like, Brian, my kid's lying. They never lied before. They're lying. Now, we were doing relational frame training, where we're building out relational frameworks and helping them make connections. And I shocked this parent to the core. I said, good. And they were like, wait, what? And I'm like, no, that means they're able to hold two concepts in their mind at the same time.
Yeah. It's complex.
It's complex. It's a critical skill. And they're like, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, okay, so now this is an opportunity for us to teach some very critical skills about honesty and about why we lie and about how it's important to be truthful, right? But also understanding that it's also okay for us to protect ourselves. And I'm like, I don't want you to get them to stop lying. I want you to know, I want you to show them that they know that they can be truthful with you. Because then they know that you're safe. And so we broke down in that particular situation what was going on. And it was so interesting, because I was a middle school teacher for 6 years.
Yes.
Well, actually, yes, 5 years. I was a high school, middle school teacher for 1 year, an elementary school teacher for 1 year, and then middle school for 5 years in a row before moving to behavior analysis. And lying in middle school is just whew, like middle schoolers. That's right at that cusp of the puberty stages where you see them go from these cute little sixth graders and they move into that awkward stage in seventh, and then they're in eighth grade and they're kind of like too cool for school type thing, but that also they're a little bit silly. And I like to call that stage the hyper rational stage, meaning they hyper rationalize, not that they're rational, but they come through and they rationalize these different things. And so one of the things I learned very early on while working with some different therapists and some other teachers with experience, and then from my own experience, was like, don't ask a kid if you know they lied. Like, because you're just going to get more lying.
Yes.
Right. It's you state what you observe, you state what the problem is, and then you say, how do we solve this?
Yeah.
Right. And because otherwise, if I lie, maybe I can get out of this. And then that reinforces the lying behavior. Right. And then the other thing is, like, if we're going to have consequences for actions, make sure the consequences match the action and match the developmental / skill level of the individual. So
very important.
Like, the number of times I've had parents be like, you're going to be grounded for a month if you do this. And then the kid does it. And then the kid dives deeper into it because the parent's just like, well, I guess you're grounded for a year. And it's like, you're stuck. They're stuck. And this actually happened a couple weeks back with a new learner that I'm working with, where the parent fell into this trap. And I am so grateful for this parent because they were so flexible with me, because I was there, I was observing, I was coaching my RBT, and I kind of showed the parent how, we can earn our way back. We can work our way back, but we need to correct. Yeah. I actually didn't say earn. I said work our way back. Because, and like, we had the tantrum, we had the little meltdown, we had all the things that were happening, but I showed parent how to maintain the expectation, but also have some flexibility by meeting the kid where they were at. It was really funny because it was all around a TV remote. And so the correction happened where the parent placed the expectation, help me make this food. The kid came over and made the food. And then I prompted the parent. I said, great, now that they did that, we can work our way back, but we need to practice doing it right. So take the remote, put it back over there where it was thrown, and place the demand, bring me the remote, please. Right? And the kid went into tantrum cycle again. And I said, it's okay. We can wait. It's fine. We waited it out. The kid crawled over to the remote, crawled over to the parent. And I just kind of coached a little bit. It's okay. We can shape our way up to doing this in a more effective manner, like a more efficient manner. But right now, this is where this kid is at. We'll meet you where you're at. Yeah. And it's been 3 weeks now. And already parents are reporting a significant difference because of me showing them how they can be flexible. Yep. And me showing them that they don't have to die on every hill. Yeah. Like, it's not Bunker Hill all day, every day. Yeah. It's show them how to spot those little skills that make the difference. Yeah.
And this actually dives well into another component of this area, and a question of, with that in mind, with that framework, thinking about the child and the parent in this situation and other situations, how do we support the caregivers in successfully incorporating their child's voice into services? If whatever service it might be, like, how do we promote the autistic individual's voice in care models?
That's another one of those ones that is very difficult because it depends on the individual. It depends on the situation, and it depends on what we're working on, right? Because like, if we're talking about safety things and the kid's like, I want to put my hand in the stand mixer, it's like, sorry, that's never going to be an option. Yeah. Right. Like, there's other people out there, let them do what they want. And I'm like, no. I am responsible for the safety of this human. Yeah. right? and I love this human and I want to make sure that they're safe. So the answer is no, you can never put your hand into a rotating machinery thing that's not designed for that, right? And at the same time, it's looking at it from the perspective of boundaries. So a lot of times when people talk about boundaries, they really mean rules. Rules are like, this is the behavior expectation in this environment, right? But a boundary is, this is what I'm going to do if this happens. So it's not what you're going to do. If I set a boundary and the boundary is you're going to, that's not a boundary. That's a rule, and people can and will violate rules. The saying, rules are meant to be broken.
Yes.
I'm going to offer a refinement of that.
I'm so excited to hear this.
Rules that don't match the environment are meant to be broken.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay. So the rule is, if it's a bad rule, it's not going to be followed.
Yeah.
If it's a rule that matches the environment, it's likely to be followed, and we can shape that skill of following the rule. Very rarely do we have problems with people staying in their lanes when driving down a 2-lane highway. Right?
Yep.
Because that's a pretty good rule to follow. Are there exceptions to that? Yes. Maybe somebody's in a rush and they're not thinking about the potential harm of passing on a double line. Right?
Yeah.
Or maybe somebody has some sort of health issue and it causes them to swerve off, or they're driving distracted. But again, it goes back to the rules that match the environment are followed.
Yep.
More often than not. But when it comes to boundaries are like that situation with the stand mixer. That boundary is, if you put your hand towards that, I'm going to block it.
Yes.
It's stating clearly what's going on. Now, in behavior analysis, there's this concept called extinction, or operant extinction is the full name. And some people will come to me because apparently people think I'm an expert in neurodiversity aligned practice. I'm not. I'm always learning. I'm always asking myself questions and challenging myself on what my expectations are. And I think I figured out what neurodiversity aligned practice is, and it's not any one technique. I've had people come to me and be like, well, is extinction neurodiversity aligned? And my answer is no. Well, and they're like, so never do extinction? And I say no. Because it's a process. There's no one thing that is not, there's no one thing that's aligned with neurodiversity or trauma informed or whatever buzzword you want to insert in. Does it match the needs of the individual, and does it honor their rights? Now, sometimes we have a hierarchy of rights, like the right to be able to be uninjured. So we're protecting your right to be uninjured because you're not aware of the potential harm that's coming from that. But then there's other hierarchies too, like the hierarchy to be able to have choice on what you want to do. A lot of times people, especially people who have intellectual disabilities, are so infantilized that they're not allowed to enjoy substances.
Yep.
Yet if you're an adult, you have the right to be able to enjoy alcohol. As long as you're following the rules that are in place, and you have solid boundaries in place. So yeah, like if there's a legitimate health issue, like liver disease and that sort of thing, all right, let's work on that, right? But at the same time, if someone's an adult, they have the right to make that choice for themselves. We should not infantilize them.
Thank you so much, Brian. I completely agree with you on that point. This will be the end of part 1, but please tune in next time for part 2, where we continue this conversation with Brian Middleton.
This has been What's Up with Catalight, part 1 of a 2-part series hosted by Dr. Lindsey Sneed. Join us for the rest of the conversation in the next episode of What's Up with Catalight.